Hi, Professor Shepard. This is my 3-minute video of myself explaining my paper topic. The topic that I will be discussing is access to abortion clinics, the impact of bubble zones on individuals' First Amendment rights, offering an anti-abortion message. What this topic is about is basically looking at bubble zones around healthcare facilities offering abortion services, and ultimately finding a way for anti-abortion protesters to be able to protest within the bubble zone. And I'll be exploring this by looking at the First Amendment, using the First Amendment to peacefully protest, showing that the statutes and ordinances that allow bubble zones are unconstitutional, and looking closely at the Freedom of Access of Clinic Entrance Act and how it needs to be amended to be narrowly define the terms such as obstruction, intimidates, and interference in order to balance First Amendment rights. For my topic, I'll be looking first at the background and the history of the First Amendment to the Constitution. I'll be looking at abortion and American law and the history about that. And lastly, the history of the bubble zone as it pertains to abortion clinics and where we were before to where we are now. After that, I'll be discussing the court's struggle to balance these conflicting concerns of anti-abortion protesters and the right of privacy of abortion patients. Within that, I'll be looking at the different methods that the court uses to balance these conflicting concerns by issuing injunctions to regulate protesters from harassing patients, from looking at bubble zones to regulate distance between the parties, and also restrictions on sidewalk counseling where protesters should remain reasonably quiet and also terminate their counseling when the patient desires to have it canceled. With that, I'll also be looking at patients' rights, looking closely at cases related to it, such as Madsen versus Women's Healthcare Center and their establishment of a 36-foot buffer zone around a clinic entrance and driveway. Looking at the Schenck versus Pro-Choice Network of New York, and also looking closely at the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrance Act and its components. But then I'll be also looking at the First Amendment and looking at and analyzing that in regards to the bubble zone, how the government needs to be neutral about it and not really intervene when it comes to private parties, and the right and the balancing of the right to protest against abortion and the right to have an abortion so that they could actually be in equal footing instead of one having more gravitas than the other one. And then lastly, I'll be looking at FACE and seeing how we could narrowly define the terms within the acts to balance First Amendment rights, because the terms are vague when it comes to obstruction, intimidates, things like that, interference. It's so vague, and I believe that we should probably narrow it down so we could be able to define it better, and then we can balance the First Amendment rights of protesters who want to protest within the bubble zone. And that's pretty much all I have. Thank you for your time, sir.